She was humiliated on stage by the man she gave up everything for. Left with nothing but a broken heart and a ring on a table, Isabel Carter vanished, only to return years later as a powerful CEO with a secret past and a new love who would risk everything to protect her. But when the man who shattered her comes back, begging for a second chance, her world spins again. Will she choose the one who broke her or the one who healed her? Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stir the soul. The ballroom shimmered with elegance, the air filled with the soft clink of crystal and the polite laughter of high society. Isabel Carter stood on stage, her fingers trembling slightly as they gripped the microphone. This was supposed to be Nathaniel's big night, the unveiling of his latest tech venture, and she was there, as always, to support him. Her voice had barely started the opening lines of a song he once told her he loved when a sharp voice cut through the room like a blade. "Off key again, Isabel. Just stop already." Gasps echoed, the music died, the crowd stilled. Her blood ran cold as she met the eyes of her husband, Nathaniel Pierce, standing arrogantly at his table. Dressed immaculately in a midnight blue suit, he didn't even flinch, didn't even blink. The humiliation stung worse than any wound she had known in her military days. Her voice faltered, her hands lowered, the microphone slipped, clattering to the floor. People were staring, whispering, some with pity, others with disdain. Her cheeks flushed crimson. Her legs begged to flee, but her pride held her frozen. And then, as if the cruelty had only just begun, Nathaniel calmly approached the stage. In one fluid motion, he produced a folder and placed it on the music stand before her. "Sign it. The sooner the better," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. Isabel's vision blurred, but not from the stage lights. Her heart pounded in disbelief. She opened the folder, hands trembling, to reveal annulment papers. Cold, clinical, final. And it wasn't the divorce that made her knees go weak. It was the brutal realization that she had meant nothing to the man she had sacrificed her life for. She was a footnote in his story, a convenience discarded when the script changed. One of Nathaniel's assistants, ever dutiful, stepped forward and offered her a pen. Her fingers felt numb, but her spine straightened. If he wanted her to break down here, in front of all these strangers, he would not get that satisfaction. Not tonight. With a steady breath, she signed her name. Once, then again. The last signature etched the final nail into the coffin of their so-called love. Slowly, she removed her wedding ring and placed it atop the papers with an eerie calm. "It's over," she said softly. Nathaniel gave a slight nod. "Good. Now you don't have to embarrass yourself further." And then came the sound no one expected, a thunderous, rhythmic thump from above. Heads turned, the chandeliers trembled. Through the vast windows of the ballroom, a sleek black helicopter descended onto the building's helipad. Eyes widened, murmurs rose. "Who the hell shows up now?" Nathaniel muttered, visibly annoyed. The ballroom doors burst open. A tall man in a pilot uniform strode in, the very image of composed urgency. He bypassed the guards, the guests, the silence, and made his way straight to Isabel. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't apologize for the interruption. He simply held out his hand. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low and steady, like an anchor in the storm. Isabel looked at him, and for the first time in hours she felt grounded. She didn't look back at Nathaniel. Not once. She took the pilot's hand with grace and defiance. "Yes," she said. "It's time I returned to my real life." Behind her, Nathaniel stood speechless, watching as the woman he had tossed aside walked away without a shred of hesitation. And as the pilot let her out, the only thing Isabel left behind was a ring, a name she no longer wanted, and a crowd that would never forget the night a discarded woman chose flight over silence. They used to be the couple everyone envied, Isabel with her calm intelligence and quiet charm, Nathaniel with his commanding presence and dazzling success. When they first started dating, the chemistry between them was undeniable. Nathaniel would take her on spontaneous weekend getaways, surprise her with handwritten notes on her coffee cup, and speak of the future like it was already theirs. Isabel, a former Air Force officer who had spent years in disciplined service, had finally let herself believe in softness, in love, in something that wasn't survival. And when Nathaniel asked her to marry him beneath a canopy of stars during a ski trip to Aspen, her yes came through tears of joy. Their wedding was intimate, elegant, and sincere. Isabel wore her mother's pearl earrings. Nathaniel, unusually emotional, whispered, "You're my only home," as they danced. At first, married life was beautiful. Mornings with shared coffee rituals, weekend hikes, long evenings curled up with books or startup blueprints. She had left her military career behind to support Nathaniel's growing tech company full-time. At the time, it felt like love, a sacrifice for a future they both believed in. And for a while, it was. But cracks don't always show right away. Sometimes, they're hairline fractures that deepen slowly, silently. It started with Nathaniel working late, then traveling more. He said it was for investors, expansion, responsibility. Isabel didn't complain. She knew what pressure looked like. But when they were together, something had changed. The warmth was fading. The conversations became logistics. His eyes drifted elsewhere, even when she was talking. She chalked it up to stress. She cooked his favorite meals, left encouraging notes in his work bag, scheduled a weekend trip to Lake Tahoe. He canceled last minute. Then came the talk of children. They both wanted a family, or so she thought. They tried for months. Each negative pregnancy test was a punch to the heart, but she kept smiling, saying, "Maybe next month." Nathaniel stopped saying anything at all. When they visited the fertility clinic, she clutched his hand like it was a lifeline. He didn't squeeze back. The diagnosis came on a rainy Tuesday. Isabel had a rare condition that made conception difficult. Possible, but unlikely. Intensive treatments might help, but there were no guarantees. The doctor's voice was clinical, detached. But when Isabel looked at Nathaniel, expecting to find comfort or even just a hand on her shoulder, he was already checking his phone. On the ride home, he didn't speak. At home, he went straight to the bedroom and shut the door. That night, she stood in the kitchen alone, dinner untouched, staring out the window as the rain battered the glass. "I didn't choose this," she whispered into the silence. "I didn't want this to happen to me." She waited for him to come out. He didn't. The days that followed felt like a slow erasure. Mornings without kisses, dinners eaten apart. One night, Isabel wore the red dress Nathaniel had once said made her look like a movie star. She invited him to a rooftop restaurant, the place where they once made promises under city lights. "Do you remember?" she asked, gently holding his hand. Nathaniel stared out over the skyline, then pulled his hand back. "Can we stop this?" Her throat tightened. "Stop what?" "This. Us." She couldn't speak. The words stung more than she imagined. "But I still love you," she said, her voice trembling. He looked at her with tired eyes. "That's not enough." She asked him if he still loved her. He couldn't answer. His silence was the answer. In the weeks after, she tried to save them, cooking his favorite dishes, sending him messages, waiting for him to come home. He came home later and later. And then one evening, he handed her an envelope. Inside was a check and a cold request to sign annulment papers. "I don't want to hurt you anymore," he said. But the truth was, he already had. She had given up everything for him, her past, her wings, her world, and he had reduced her to a transaction. And in that moment, as tears slid silently down her face, Isabel realized something devastating. No matter how deeply she loved, she could never make someone stay who had already left. The night she walked away from Nathaniel, Isabel felt hollow. Not angry, not even heartbroken, just empty. Like the core of her had been scraped clean. But emptiness, she would soon learn, was fertile ground for rebuilding. Eli didn't say much as they soared above the glittering city in his helicopter, but somehow his silence felt like the safest sound she had ever known. He flew her to a quiet coastal town just north of Monterey, where the sky was clearer and the noise of judgment didn't reach. "You don't have to figure it all out now," he told her. "Just breathe. That's enough for today." For weeks, Isabel stayed with her cousin Mia, sleeping in a guest room filled with plants and mismatched furniture, waking to ocean winds instead of boardroom alarms. She started freelancing again, strategic planning for humanitarian logistics, aviation startups, even a nonprofit or two. Her name was still respected in certain circles, and this time, she wasn't just helping someone else's dream, she was reviving her own. Eli checked in occasionally, sometimes with food, sometimes with silence, sometimes with aviation magazines folded open to articles he knew would pique her curiosity. One afternoon, he invited her to visit a small, underfunded airstrip where he volunteered. Children ran barefoot across the gravel as medics loaded supplies onto small cargo planes. We fly aid to remote areas in Guatemala, South Sudan, the Himalayas. Most days it's chaos, he said with a grin. But it matters. Watching him interact with the crew, Isabel felt something stir. She had been useful once, essential, a leader. And she missed that more than she realized. That night, as they sat on an overturned crate beneath the open sky, Eli handed her a cup of lukewarm coffee. You ever think about going back into aviation? She looked up at the stars. All the time, I just didn't know where to start. You just did, he said. In the months that followed, Isabel began sketching out a new business model. A fleet of specialized aircraft providing rapid response logistics during global emergencies. Earthquakes, floods, war zones. It was ambitious, risky, but it felt real. With Eli's connections and her strategic mind, they secured early investors. She filed incorporation papers under a name that meant freedom in Latin, Altiora. Eli never hovered. He never rushed her. He simply stood beside her as she rediscovered herself. One evening, after a long day of meetings and procurement calls, Isabel returned to her temporary office to find a small box on her desk. Inside was a pair of vintage aviator wings, polished, simple, and engraved on the back. You never stopped flying, you just forgot you could. She turned around to find Eli standing in the doorway. You left the sky once. I'm glad you came back. Isabel didn't speak. Her throat tightened too much for words, so she stepped forward and hugged him, deeply, quietly, with a kind of gratitude that couldn't be spoken. Their bond deepened, slowly and organically. No confessions, no rushing, just moments. Like when Eli brought her street tacos after a long day, or when he instinctively reached for her hand during turbulence mid-flight. One night, he took her up in his favorite single-engine plane, a vintage Piper he restored himself. As they soared above the ocean, he played old Ella Fitzgerald through the intercom. You know, he said, eyes on the horizon, I used to think people had to crash hard to learn how to fly again. But you're different. You climb even after freefall. Isabel smiled, her heart fluttering in that unfamiliar, dangerous way. But she didn't stop it this time. At a fundraising gala months later, Isabel stood at the podium as the newly appointed CEO of Altiora Global Aviation. Her voice was steady, her eyes fierce, cameras flashed, applause echoed, and in the back of the room, Eli watched with quiet pride, arms crossed, heart open. But just as she stepped down from the stage, a man she hadn't seen in over a year stood in the crowd. Nathaniel, dressed in black, watching her with unreadable eyes. The ground didn't shake, her voice didn't falter, but her pulse, it roared. Nathaniel's return wasn't loud. There was no grand apology, no dramatic scene, just a sudden presence, in her inbox, at conferences, on LinkedIn tags. At first, Isabel ignored it. She had mastered that skill, ignoring the ache, ignoring the past. But he was persistent. A coffee shop 2 blocks from her office, a bouquet left with no card. And one day he waited by her car, dressed in quiet gray, eyes soft with something dangerously close to his regret. I just want 5 minutes, he said. Isabel crossed her arms. What for? To say what I should have said a long time ago. The words came out rehearsed, like a script he'd been practicing. He told her he was sorry, for the way he ended things, for making her feel disposable, for never truly seeing her strength. He told her he'd been in therapy, that he'd stepped back from the company, that after Vanessa, yes, he confirmed her suspicions, he realized how deeply he'd lost his way. You gave me everything, he said, and I gave you nothing in return. For a moment, she almost believed him. Almost. Later that evening, Isabel sat in her office, staring at a blank email draft. Eli entered quietly, holding 2 coffees and an unspoken question in his eyes. She didn't need to explain. He already knew. He always knew. You okay? He asked. I'm not sure, she admitted. They sat in silence, the kind that only 2 people who trusted each other completely could share. But inside her, old wounds were whispering again, of vows broken and love abandoned. Over the next few weeks, Nathaniel's attempts escalated. He sent handwritten letters, reminded her of old memories, asked for a second chance. We were good once, Isabel, he said during a run-in at a press event. We can be good again. But good wasn't the same as right. Still, doubt crept in like a cold draft beneath a closed door. At night, she'd find herself remembering the warmth of their early days. The way he used to smile when she walked into a room. the way his hand fit around hers like it was made to be there. Could people change? Did he really love her now, or just the idea of who she used to be? One late afternoon, Eli waited outside her office longer than usual. When she finally stepped out, he stood leaning against his car, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Isabel," he said, voice steady, "what does he want?" "To go back," she replied, barely above a whisper. "And what do you want?" Her throat tightened. "I don't know." Eli didn't press her. He just nodded, pain flickering in his eyes before he looked away. "I'm not going to compete for you," he said, "but I won't let you fall apart again either." That night, she lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her heart was a battlefield, one side pulled by memories, the other by the quiet, constant presence of a man who had never once made her question her worth. Nathaniel had been passion, fireworks. But Eli was the sun, consistent, warm, always rising. At a charity event the following weekend, she caught sight of Nathaniel again. He was talking to donors, wearing his old charm like a custom-tailored suit. He approached her during intermission. "Dance with me," he said. Isabel hesitated. Then she felt a hand on her back. "Eli, you don't have to do this," he murmured. She looked between the two men, between past and present, between a promise once broken and a promise never spoken but always honored. "I need air," she said, walking out alone. She found herself in the garden, surrounded by roses and moonlight. And there, for the first time in years, she cried, not because she was confused, but because she was finally letting go. Of what was, of what could have been, of who she had been when she loved Nathaniel. The next morning she knew exactly what she needed to do, not for either of them, for herself. The sun rose quietly over the villa by the sea, casting golden light through the sheer curtains of the guest room, where Isabel lay wide awake. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her mind had been racing ever since that night in the garden, where tears had finally cleansed years of confusion, longing, and pain. That night, she hadn't chosen Nathaniel. But she hadn't quite chosen Eli, either. Not yet. Because first she needed to choose herself, and that meant facing everything she had tried to bury. Later that week, Isabel made the drive alone to the military base where she once trained, the place where she first learned to fly. Not just planes, but her own spirit. As she stood on the tarmac watching cadets march in perfect unison, something stirred deep within her. She had been powerful once, not because she was with someone, but because she was herself. She had let that girl go. But now, she was ready to meet her again. Returning home, Isabel found Eli waiting on the rooftop of their office building, a simple picnic laid out under the stars, 2 glasses of wine, a soft blanket, and the familiar ease of his presence. "You've been quiet," he said, offering her a glass. "I've been remembering," she replied. "Not the pain, just who I used to be." "And who are you now?" he asked gently. She looked at him, really looked, the man who had never once asked her to be anything other than what she was, who had stayed through the storms without needing to be the hero. "I'm someone who wants to stop surviving and start living," she said. Eli smiled, setting his glass down. "Then let's live." Their lips met for the first time, not in a rush, not in desperation, but in deep understanding. It was a kiss of quiet conviction, of something earned. But just when things seemed to settle into peace, the past returned with one last cruel twist. Raphael wasn't done. He showed up uninvited at Isabel's seaside villa. No entourage, no arrogance, just a man unraveling at the seams. "Come home with me," he said, voice trembling. "I know I broke you, but I've changed. I swear." Eli stood beside Isabel, hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "She's not going back with you," he said calmly. Raphael's eyes darkened. "Say it then," he challenged. "Say you don't love me anymore, Isabel. Look me in the eye and say it." And she did. "I don't love you anymore." But before she could turn away, Raphael's face contorted. "If I can't have you," he growled, pulling something from his jacket. A flash of metal. A gun. "Get back!" Eli shouted, pulling Isabel behind him. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Eli had called them in advance, sensing something wasn't right. A single shot rang out. Not fatal, but Raphael collapsed, leg bloodied, weapon sliding across the stone path. Officers swarmed the scene, cuffing him as he whispered, broken and breathless, "I didn't know how to lose you." Isabel stood trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "You already did," she whispered, Later, in the quiet safety of their shared apartment, Eli wrapped her in his arms. "It's over now," he said. "You're safe." And for the first time in years, she believed it. Weeks passed. Life resumed. Altiora grew. And Isabel, for once, stopped looking back. One morning, she stood in the bathroom staring at a pregnancy test. 2 lines. Her hands shook, not from fear but awe. She thought she couldn't have children, that it was a closed chapter. But sometimes life blooms when you least expect it. Later that night, she handed Eli a small box. Inside, a tiny pair of aviator booties. His eyes widened. "Are we?" She nodded, smiling through tears. "We are." Not long after, they married in a quiet civil ceremony overlooking the ocean. Simple. Perfect. And in time, they learned it wasn't just one child they were expecting, but 3. Triplets. She hadn't been able to grow a family with a man who saw her as incomplete. But now, with the man who loved her completely, she was overflowing. And for the first time, Isabel wasn't flying to escape anything. She was flying home. Sometimes, the most powerful kind of love is the one you give to yourself when the world tries to convince you that you're not enough. Isabel's journey wasn't just about romance. It was about rediscovering her strength, reclaiming her identity, and realizing that healing doesn't come from the person who broke you, but from within. She gave her all to someone who didn't value it, and for a while she thought that was the end of her story. But endings can become beginnings in disguise. This story reminds us that letting go of what hurts isn't giving up, it's making space for something better. Real love doesn't abandon you in hard times. It doesn't force you to shrink yourself. It shows up, stays consistent, and supports your growth without fear. Eli didn't fix Isabel. He simply stood beside her as she rose. That's the kind of love we all deserve. One that recognizes our worth, not one that asks us to prove it. And perhaps the most important lesson of all, when you finally choose peace, when you stop chasing what's already walked away, life has a beautiful way of giving you back more than you ever lost. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next story that just might speak to your heart. Thank you for being here.